What makes it worth it now?
It's definitely, I call it the click. It's the moment that you help a student achieve another level of mastery or another level of understanding. It's that relating to people and being like, I believe in a lot of humanism in my practice as an educator. I be like, oh, I'm so frustrated by this. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, you're right, it doesn't make sense. And they're like, wait a minute, what? And I'm like, no, it is a hard concept to understand. So let's break this down. I will pull in everything from Cardi B lyrics to TikTok to help make points and make it stick, whatever's going to work, and see like a student like, oh my God, I like that. Or I'm going to remember that. I'm not going to forget that. And when they come back and they'll tell me like, today I was in clinical and this came up and I remembered you told me this, and this, and we sung Cardi B and, all that kind of stuff. So I love seeing that click moment.
Hey there, I'm your host, Sarah Lorenzini, a rapid response nurse and educator who loves telling stories to teach critical thinking. This podcast is for nurses who want the knowledge, skills, and confidence to respond to any emergency. With almost 20 years of experience in the ER and critical care nursing and a master's degree in nursing education, I have a lot of stories to share, and I love to nerd out and break down the pathophysiology, pharmacology, and nurses' role in emergencies. Stories bring learning to life. It is way easier to learn from and remember the stories that my colleagues and mentors have told me than anything I've read in a textbook. And that is why I made this podcast. Every episode is packed full of exactly what you need to know to handle whatever crisis that could arise on your shift. It's one thing to get the right answer on the test, but knowing how to detect when your patient is declining and what to do when your patient is crashing is what will make or break your day and might just save your patient's life. Welcome back to the Rapid Response Run podcast. Today's episode is going to be a little different. I love teaching, and this podcast platform has given me such a great opportunity to support nurses' education. But today, I hope to support nurses a little differently. This podcast is in response to the many, many questions that I receive from you about going back to school. So many of you are considering going back for a graduate degree in nursing, but you kind of have to pick which track you're going to pursue. Nurse practitioner, nursing leader, nurse anesthetist, nurse educator, clinical nurse specialist, nurse midwife. I mean, there's so many great options in nursing. And so I wanted to do a little series called So You Want to Go Back to School? And interview a nurse from each graduate specialty to help you make the most informed decision about going back to school before you dive in. You may remember a few weeks back, I interviewed Sandra about her experience transitioning from being a bedside nurse to being a nurse practitioner. And this week, I have another very special guest who's a nurse educator who I cannot wait for you to meet. I actually found him randomly on Instagram because of a video that popped up on my feed. And I was like, this guy needs to represent nurse educator. So I'm super excited to have him on my podcast today. So Patrick, welcome to the Rapid Response RN podcast.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. So before I have Patrick tell his story, because that's the whole goal of this podcast, I want to tell you how I found Patrick. So remember that social media trend like a few months back where it's like, I'm a blah, blah, blah. Of course I blah, blah, blah. Let me play you Patrick's really quick. Hold on. I have his Instagram pulled up here.
Black man who's a nurse educator. Of course I'm the only one. I'm a black man who's a nurse educator. Of course I have lotion in my backpack. You want some? Make sure you get them elbows and them ankles too. I'm a black man who's a nurse educator. Of course I won't walk a library.
You get the idea. I watched the video so many times and I cracked up. I haven't told you before, Patrick, but my favorite nurse educator that I have learned the most under was a black man who was a nurse educator. Actually, he was awesome. Brian was the CVICU educator when I started there. And I was like, this man has so much knowledge. He's transferring to me. I'm so grateful. Like I learned everything hemodynamics from him. All of the like phaser pressors I learned from him. So yes, he definitely broke the mold. And so do you. I love your heart and your vibe and your approach to nursing. And I'm super, super grateful you took time out of your day to join me today.
I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you had that experience. So.
Yes. So let's talk about how rewarding this role as a nurse educator is. I wanted you to start just by kind of sharing your nursing journey. Like, why did you become a nurse in the first place? And then what's your career path look like since you began? And why nursing education?
I started off my career. I'm a second generation nurse. My mom is a nurse. And so she became an RN, I think, when I was like 7 or 8 years old, something like that. And so she was the first nurse in our family, the first healthcare professional that I knew in our family. And so even beyond that, I think the other like joking things I wanted to do before that was like being a detective. That was like kind of one of the first things I remember.
I mean, there's some similarities, right?
There's a lot of similarities. Like you have to be nosy to do both nursing and detective work. So I think I ended up achieving that goal to some extent. But being a nurse at that point, I just saw my mom and she went through school. She was a single mom and she just was doing great things. I remember she bought these books home. And then like when she got into practice, she would like bring home like the disposable stethoscopes and let me play with them and stuff like that. And so the first thing I ever seriously wanted to be was a nurse. I remember I have memories of my mom. She worked as a home health and hospice nurse for a little while. And you know, this was the early 2000s. So she would take me with her on some of her visits sometimes. And I remember seeing her take care of these people. And I got to know some of these people that she saw regularly. And so I was like, this is the first thing I ever seriously wanted to be. And I always loved science, social science particularly. I love biology and social science the most. Those are my two favorite. And like nursing just fit that so well. Like nursing is really this convergence of like the biological sciences and the social sciences, like mashed together. If they had a baby, it would be nursing. So I really liked that. But then I think I was, you know, like I said, between 7 and 9 at this point, they were done with like, if you're a boy, boys can't be nurses. So I'm in my, 8, 9-year-old mind, the second best thing to be a nurse, if I couldn't be a nurse, was like, well, I guess I have to be a doctor, or a physician. And then I went through a couple of different iterations. I wanted to be a psychologist for a while. And I just kept coming back to nursing because nursing, as I got older, I learned how many pathways there was the option to be an advanced practice nurse. You could go on to get a master's or a doctorate degree. You could work 3 days a week. You could work 5 days a week. You could work at night. You could work on weekends. You could travel. I found as I started, I'm like, no, nursing is that girl. Like nursing is that girl. She's the one that you need to really get. I'm like, why would I go to school? And I like that nursing was like kind of had a stair-step model. Like you can go to school and become a CNA, right? You can start down becoming a CNA. You can become an LPN. You can become a RN through an associate's degree program or a bachelor's degree program and then higher, right? So it wasn't like you had to wait many years before you finally started practicing your craft.
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, this is definitely what I'm going to do. So I came back about 14. I was like, forget all the naysayers. I looked at the path and what I wanted from my life, and nursing aligned most heavily with that. It gave me the options. I know as a person that I love my work. I want to be invested. But also, too, I didn't want to have to spend all of my 20s, all of my 30s in school and not really actually practicing my art, right? And I want to be able to make money along the way. And that was important to me. So nursing fit for multiple reasons, just from schedule wise, from the flexibility of the options, from the how nursing inhabits both biology and social sciences or the life sciences and social sciences. It fit my personality, right? The way I wanted to engage with people. And so I chose nursing for that reason. And in high school, I took a CNA course in high school, offered through my high school, and I became a CNA when I was 17. And then I had to wait till I was 18 to start working. And I started working as a CNA. And I actually went the community college route because I had the option to go to a university. I got accepted into a few, but I was like, I want to be a nurse as soon as possible. And I want to be able to get to work and start, learning quickly and go to somewhere where I know I'm going to get good skills. So I went to the same community college my mom went to for her associate's degree many years later. And I ended up being full circle because I ended up coming back and teaching there a little bit as adjunct faculty. But yeah, I went there. I started nursing school at 18 because I graduated from high school at 17 and I finished when I was 20. And I started working as a CBICU nurse. I fell in love with I went into nursing thinking that I was going to either be a psych nurse or an ER nurse and came out being a critical care nurse. And that's not anything I would have imagined. And so I went to the CBICU and I did my preceptorship or my capstone in the CBICU and I got hired in that same CBICU. And so I started off there, right? And I loved it. I had a great preceptor who was also an associate degree prepared nurse, but she was a shift supervisor on our unit, and she really exuded the idea that you have to put an effort in nursing. You can't just you have to study at home. She was like, I'm not expecting you to have your life be here, but if you're going to be a critical care nurse, you have to put an effort outside of just when we're at work. And she really exuded that idea of being a clinician and practicing at the top of your license and figuring stuff out for yourself, not just relying on whatever, the providers say or what other nurses say, really working through things for yourself. So it was a great experience, and I went on to stayed there for about 2 years full time. And then I stayed PRN and I did some travel nursing for a little bit. I worked in different rural hospitals around North Carolina area, the surrounding North Carolina. Then I eventually landed back in the central North Carolina area, and I started working at UNC Medical Center. And I don't mind sharing because, that was where I worked. And I worked as a float pool nurse in the adult care spectrum. So I did everything from critical care to ED and psych, med surge. And it really made me a much more diverse nurse, right? Because my primary background had been critical care, step down experience primarily. And so the fact that I had to learn how to roll with the punches in med surge, or just different subspecialties, a GI floor versus a bone marrow transplant floor. And at that time, it was during this time when I was traveling, I was like, I really enjoyed teaching people and patients about seeing things make sense for them. And I enjoyed doing the same thing the times I, been a preceptor for students. And I kind of got the flair about I want to be an educator, which at that point I was finishing my BSN at Western Governors University. And I was about to I was finishing that and I wanted to go into graduate school. So in travel nursing and everything, I found I really like doing this. I like helping people make sense of things, whether it's a patient or whether it's a student. Or another nurse. So I enrolled at Western Governors. I went straight from my bachelor's to my master's and to get the master's in nursing education. And I did it on a very part-time basis. I was still working. I was still a clinician. But I took that job intentionally at the float pool because I was like, oh, this will give me an opportunity to learn how not just to be an ICU nurse. Because I tell people all the time, being an ICU nurse gives you so many skills and so many greatest things, but you learn different skills being a nurse in med surge. And we rag on med surge a lot, but med surge nurses are taking care of the majority of the patients in the hospital. And I wanted to be that nurse that had that flexibility. I can roll with the punches in the ICU. I can roll with the punches in the ED, and I can roll with the punches in med surge. I feel to me, that's the pinnacle of nursing. I can thrive in multiple environments. And I said, when I start teaching, if I'm going to be teaching an acute care med surge course, I want to know what it's like and be able to give them real perspective. So that happened. And then pandemic kind of came towards the middle point of my program. And I slowed down a lot because it was obviously we were in crisis. And as float pool nurses, I was being used heavily with COVID response. And it was rough. It was rough to get through grad school. But then I finished finally in 2022. And I got my first job as a nurse specialist at UNC's School of Nursing, which is the university associated with UNC Medical Center. So UNC Chapel Hill School of Nursing, and then inaugural role. So that's me. That was a lot.
That's awesome. There's so many similarities to our stories. I too graduated nursing school super young. I was 19. I did the Associate's U program. Right out of school, I went to the ER, but then CVICU. The other similarity I want to talk to you about was the experience of working in the CVICU, where I feel like everyone I worked alongside was on track to go to CRNA school or nurse practitioner school. And I'm the lone nerd that's like, I'm going to be a nurse educator. And people are like, why? Why would you do nursing education when you could be a CRNA or a nurse practitioner? And I'm sure you got that question too. How do you respond to that question? Why nursing education?
I mean, I definitely was on that wheel of I never really wanted to be a CRNA. I mean, I did my OR rotation in my ADM program, and I was just like, oh no, I'll be bored to death. Not that the job isn't important. I just like the nature of how it manifests with different surgeries. I was like, I don't think this is my shtick. So I thought about becoming a nurse practitioner at one point as well. But I was just like, I think that one, education doesn't get it's not the popular job, right? It's not there's a lot of social media, there's a good social media exposure about NP. This is the road to go. It's really offered as this pedestal of nursing practice. But what I came to realize is that nursing doesn't exist if there's not people to teach it. And so nursing practice, there's no nurse practitioners, there are no CRNAs, there are no nurse managers, there are no nurse researchers, no nurse scientists, if there aren't people to teach people how to be nurses. So I'm by me being a nurse educator, I get to touch and influence how all of nursing develops. I feel especially if you start to grow and your role as an educator and grow your influence, you really get to influence how all of nursing manifests and changes. And in addition to that, people think that the only time you need a nurse educator is when you're in school. But no, we all need nurse educators. They help keep us on track. A good nurse educator, right? And so I'm nurse educators have relevance. Even if you've been in practice for 20 years, you have things that you can learn, right? There are different types of nurse educators. But I realized this is my path I wanted to do. And I realized that I love being a clinician as an RN. I love being a bedside clinician as an RN. But when I think about I was I think I am capable of learning how to diagnose and prescribe. But I'm I really like being in there, talking with patients, building this relationship with them like that, more so than wanting to be the one to have to be write this plan of care from a prescriptive standpoint, right? I like the relationship building that happens with education. I like the care coordination that kind of comes with or education. It felt like it just fit more in alignment with what I did. I think a lot of times people don't really take time to explore because a lot of times nowadays, particularly with the challenges we see at the bedside, like people just feel like nurse practitioner or CRNA is their escape from the bedside. And I'm like, I get the why behind that, right? And I'm like, oh, there's so many options that nursing graduate school can offer and that nursing can offer you. And I looked at education and I'm like, this is where we need people, where there's a deficit. And it's also true that a lot of people, there's challenges that come with that. And there's things like nursing education is just not propped up as much, despite the fact that without nursing educators, none of us would be here. You know, it's a little wet, but I definitely think that I like being a bedside clinician. There's some people that very much have explained to me, I feel like I'm not doing enough as an RN. And I've never felt like that. So that wasn't a drive for me to go to advanced practice. I'm very content with that scope of practice that way. If anything, being an educator helped me understand the role that I have as an RN more fully, right? And expand my view of what an RN can do outside of just advanced practice. So being an educator helped me learn how to expand my view of what nursing could be and to have a better imagination about my career trajectory. Doesn't have to be this one thing. It doesn't have to just be like CBICU CRNA school. If you want to do that, that's completely fine. But there's so many other options or you can do both, you can be both. I think that people don't consider that as well. So I think that we needed people who knew how to teach, right? Because I loved that my preceptor and the educators I had, they knew how to make things make sense in a particular way. They had the specific training on how to be an educator, because there's a difference of being an expert clinician and being a good educator. And I think people, a lot of times because we're having such a shortage now, it's like, as long as you have a master's, it doesn't matter if what the focus is in, we will take you. And we do need you, right? And you don't have to necessarily have an MSN that focuses in education to be a good educator. But I do feel like you invest in either time or training or getting mentored and invest in continuing education to learn how to be the art of teaching. We've all had those professors where we're like, you're just reading slideshows to me. That doesn't do anything, the death by PowerPoint. So I think I had really good educators and people who could take and make really interesting connections with things and it make it click for me. I wanted to be able to do that for other people. So that's why I chose it.
Got it. I love it. So now that you're doing this full time, you're a full-time nursing educator. What do you love about it? Like, what makes it all worth it when you're Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick break to talk about something that I think is really important. And that is getting certified in your nursing specialty. Not because having the extra letters behind your name make you a better nurse, but because taking the time to deep dive into all that you need to know for your specialty, putting in the study hours, and dedicating yourself to mastering what your patients need you to know how to manage them best, the prep for the exam, is what will make you a better nurse. So whatever specialty you are currently working in, go study for that certification exam. And if you're a critical care nurse, I have something that will help you pass your CCRN. My friend Nick McGowan has an excellent online self-paced CCRN prep course called Critical Care Academy. It is so thorough, and he has broken down everything you need to know into little bite-sized digestible content that he calls micro-learning. Let me tell you, the CCRN is the hardest test I've taken in my entire life. You don't want to go it alone. You want to take this course to ensure that you know your stuff before sitting for the exam. If you'd like to check out his course, you can find it at ccrnacademy.com. And great news, just for being a Rapid Response RN podcast listener, you get 10% off the cost of the course by using the coupon code RAPID10 at checkout. So if you've ever considered getting your CCRN, do it. And let Critical Care Academy help make sure that you will pass. I'll put the link and coupon code in the show notes. Okay, I spent so much money on grad school, all this time in the middle of the pandemic, taking these classes. Like, what makes it worth it now?
It's definitely, I call it the click. It's the moment that you help a student achieve another level of mastery or another level of understanding. It's that relating to people and being like, I believe in a lot of humanism in my practice as an educator. I enjoy seeing somebody be like, oh, I'm so frustrated by this. I'm like, and this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, you're right, it doesn't make sense. And they're like, wait a minute, what? And I'm like, no, it is a hard concept to understand. So let's break this down. I will pull in everything from Cardi B lyrics to TikTok, things I've heard off of TikTok to help make points and make it stick, whatever's going to work. And it's so beneficial when I see like a student like, oh my God, I like that. Or I'm going to remember that. I'm not going to forget that. And when they come back and they'll tell me like, today I was in clinical and this came up and I remembered you told me this, and this, and we sung Cardi B and, all that kind of stuff. So I love seeing that click moment. And I've seen it with people who have mentored who are already nurses, people who are students. And I love that click moment of like something falls into place for you. And it may not always be something I taught you directly, but it may have been like, hey, this is a way to attack trying to learn this. Try this and see if this works. So that's probably the most beneficial thing. And that's what I love about it. I love also too that I have this opportunity to change their perception. So they don't come in with the biases that I came in about what nursing is and what real nurses are and what they aren't. I get to introduce them to that at an early stage. And that slowly, by doing that in my own small way, right, I'm getting to influence how these newer generations of people or even experienced nurses might change their view of what nursing is and what nursing can be.
And what it can be. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. So that's the fun side. Those aha moments, the click, like you call it, that's like, it makes it all worth it. But also, like, what would you say are the biggest challenges or like frustrations you're finding in this role, and how are you overcoming them?
There's it's a mixture of things, right? It's a lot of bureaucracy, nursing education as a whole. And it's like not even specific just to my current job, but just as a whole, we struggle with change, right? There's a lack of diversity and we're developing our diversity in nursing. We're growing definitely, but like in nursing education, it's even less diverse typically. And so I don't see many other people who look like me oftentimes. I am thankful that at my current job, I have people who I can identify with, or people who come from varied and diverse backgrounds, not just by race, but just by religious experience, by lived experiences, economic and geographical backgrounds. I'm seeing that. And so that's something that we're really needing to improve in nursing or having a nurse educator that's bilingual, right? I became bilingual as an adult in French, but like I realized like how great would it be? Like it gives me even being an adult learner, it gave me a level of insight on why we need to be more understanding and why, we really need to be inclusive in how we're creating these curriculums and who we're inviting in, right? So there's a lot of frustration from that standpoint. But, the bureaucracy and the little things like grading papers, it sucks for everybody, guys. I just need you to know it sucks for everybody. As much as I enjoy creating really like nice assignments that are creative. And when I have the ability to be creative with my assignments, I find that I enjoy grading them a lot more. But we have to do papers and stuff because we have to fortify certain skill sets that you have to have. And it just sucks. It's unnecessary even for us all.
It's like documentation at the bedside.
It is. It's the equivalent of documentation at the bedside. It sucks, and it's a lot. And then there's just a lot of like, I have a very different perspective. I think having gone to school during the pandemic, having gotten an MSN, I don't want to like restrict it because there are people who have had an MSN who got an MSN years ago who are very creative. But I feel like my curriculum focuses a lot on online teaching. How do we leverage that? We talked about simulation. We talked about diverse learners. And so because of that, I'm very gung-ho about like, we need to change certain things and we don't need to have this be beholden to this one way of doing things. And there's some things that we need to change about. Some processes in nursing education as a whole are very violent and they're very exclusive. These high stake testings and things like, I'm just not a big fan of it, right? I'm like, we need to be much more focused on developing competencies that are meaningful, that are going to have a meaningful output. But sometimes our curriculum restricts us a little bit. And because we have to help prepare people to pass a test, it means that we're kind of, we try not to teach to the test, right? We want to do more than just teach you to pass a test in nursing school. We want to give you skill for success. But sometimes with curriculum and accreditation requirements, it can feel easy to feel boxed in that like, that's like, but it's unnecessary. We need standards and we need accreditation, but like it comes with that side that sometimes certain jobs can make you feel more boxed by that than others, right? Because I feel like we should have a blend of both. Like we should be able to teach you to pass this test, but I'm also wanting you to translate that into meaningful skills and competency, right? So those are some of the things that I'm not against that culture. I'm like, if someone it doesn't really matter if someone has tattoos. It doesn't really matter if someone has purple hair when they go to clinical. Like, it shouldn't really matter. Like, so some schools are that is changing a lot. In a lot of schools, those policies, like our school doesn't have any super strong restrictions when it comes to stuff like that. But I'm just like, some places are a lot more conservative in that nature. And I'm just like, why? It has nothing to do with your nursing practice. And so That's a positive change that I am kind of seeing. But it's something that we're fighting to an extent. It's very traditional, I guess, if you want to quote in quotes, views about what nursing education looks like.
Yeah. I mean, while you're talking about these high stakes things, I remember being in nursing school and I failed my Foley catheter insertion checkoff because as I was finishing the checkoff, even though I had all the 17 steps correct, I didn't say, and now I would wash my hands. I forgot to say that part, and I was failed, like 1 point off, and you're done, right?
Right.
She's bawling, like she messed up my whole month, you know?
To me, it shouldn't be like my thing is like, you actually completed the skill and you're good.
Right.
To me, that should be feedback. That shouldn't be you failed the test. Like if washing your hands that's just feedback. Hey, remember you would wash your hands. Because the thing is,
or my friend that got sent home from clinicals because she had the wrong color shoes. She had too much color on her shoes. They had to be pure white. I was like, you're going to make her miss clinicals because she had like a black stripe on her shoe?
Sense. And and various schools are more or less on that spectrum, but there are still people, I still hear students every day or I'm not like a big fan of this whole thing. I want to teach students accountability. Like you have to be accountable. We're in a profession where you have to be accountable. But when it comes to assignment submissions, so sometimes we develop a policy, one of the classes I teach them where it's like, okay, the assignment's due by this time. If you submit even 1 minute after this time, it's not necessarily that you can't submit, but it's just that you're going to have a blanket 5% off, right? And you can submit up to 48 hours afterwards. But it allows students who are adults to kind of be like, hey, I'm struggling right now, and I'm going to take my L, and that way I can submit really quality work rather than trying to do an all-nighter and get it in, and it's trash, and then I get a lower grade. So I'm like, I like that mix of okay, you submit that late, and if you want to do that, I'm rarely grading something the same day as submitted.
Mm-hmm. Right.
10, 30, 40 plus students, according to whether it's a clinical lab or a class, So I'm like, I believe in it. You have some accountability. Okay, you're going to take your L a little bit. I'm not going to let that go on forever, but it allows them to have flexibility. I just don't believe in these very punitive policies that we tend to have. That I believe we can do a better balance of having human understanding and not being the initial response to everything being punitive.
Amen. And then as far as becoming an educator, when I came out of school, I was in my early 30s.
Right.
And I was working alongside these educators that have been doing Death by PowerPoint their entire education career.
Right.
And so here I am I just learned this awesome teaching strategy of the evolving case study. And I made a video of this patient, whatever. I loved it. I love the creativity you can bring to the classroom.
Right.
And I actually had this old battle axe professor say to me why are you doing all this stuff? The students don't even want to do that. The students just want you to give them the information so they can study and pass the test. And I was like, well, honestly, I don't care what they want. I want them to walk away actually learning the content and actually remembering this patient population, be able to apply it to practice. And first of all, none of the students have told me they don't want it. They actually love it. So I don't know what you talk about. But yeah, definitely some pressure to just stay within the box.
Right. And the literature is we have literature. I'm again, this is why as an educator, just because you're an educator doesn't mean that you have to stay up to date on what literature is saying about not only nursing, but also the art of educating adults.
Yes.
Right. And so a lot of them miss that. And I'm like, no, active learning strategies, self-directed learning, things like that tend to engage students more and they appreciate it more, especially adult learners, right? They really appreciate that a lot more, these creative approaches, because I hated Death by PowerPoint. We all hated it. And so when I had teachers that was we're going to get out of our seats today and we're going to be playing a game, I was like, bet, let's go. I mean, I was 18, 19 at the time, but still all of our class, and my good thing about going to community college, I had a range. I was the youngest person in my program, and we had somebody up into their 50s who was going to nursing school. So you had this very melange of ages, and we all were engaged. Awesome. It was great.
I love it. That's awesome. All right. So what does a day in the life of an educator look like? I know every day's a little different, but on average, okay, you wake up, you get to the hospital. Tell me what it's like.
Yeah. So since I work as an academic nurse educator, so my week is varied, right? It's a mix of, I have days where I work from home and I'm grading papers. So I'll wake up, I'll send some emails to collaborate with my colleagues on hey, we got this class coming up and we're doing a collaborative teaching. So we'll send out a PowerPoint and be like, hey, get feedback to each other and make edits. And then I may have a couple of Zoom meetings with students or with other faculty about various things. I'll be designing content to share with either my clinical group or someone in the lab. And that's a typical work from home day for me. And Zoom meetings, emails, that kind of, deal. When I go into the office, when I go to campus, I am doing usually one of three things. I'm usually either teaching, because our School of Nursing is right beside our primary hospital. I do my clinicals in. And so I'm either doing clinicals on a unit, so we're inpatient clinicals on a unit, or I am in the lab. So when I'm in the inpatient unit, I'm obviously having a shift that's a lot like nursing, right? I'm getting there early, creating assignments. I have certain clinicals where certain days I let students actually I just assign them to a nurse. I let them pick talk with the nurse and let them pick their own assignment for the day. Other times I may actually make the assignment for them, right? And I go through a 12-hour shift. I teach 8-hour and 12-hour clinicals according to which course it is. So I'll go through a typical shift. We usually take a lunch break together. I also offer them a coffee break late in the afternoon, and then we do post-conference for about 1 to 2 hours at the end of the day. As far as me going into the lab at school, I may go in that day and I have lab checkoffs. So we have people who are checking off on certain skills. And so I'm one of the team of people who is checking off a portion of students for the day. And I have an hour lunch break. And then I go back and finish checking off the people for the skill for the day. And I also have one where I teach in a lab that's more lecture style. And so I'm in the classroom where we're lecturing on a stage. In that lab, it's actually really innovative. Some of my colleagues created this class and it's super great, right? It's great. My colleagues, Dr. Aaron Stanley, and Dr. Susanna Barroso created this course. And essentially, so sometimes we're doing lectures and we're talking about really hard-hitting topics, everything from sexual assault, human trafficking, and how they show up in nursing. And those aren't things we learned about in nursing school. So it's this like lab where we talk about a lot of these things that we wish we would have had in school. Erin is a sexual assault nurse examiner, so we have her knowledge and expertise. And Susanna has a background, like emergency preparedness and things like that. And so we'll do that. And I'm in that lab. It's much more typical. Like we do 2 sessions. We split our cohort of like 115 up into 2 sections, or 114 into 2 sections. We'll teach the class for the morning session, have a little 30-minute break, and then teach the class the afternoon session. So that's what my day looks like according to what I'm doing. I also have times where I'm working with my other nurse specialists, as my role is called, and we're collaborating on revising content for some of the labs and stuff like that. So it's like we may be on Zoom and we're like, okay, like we want to update this or bring this up to the attention of like the simulation director, be like, hey, this might be a way we can change this to be more reflective of modern day practice. So we kind of have that reviewing lens as well, where we get to help kind of try to keep the curriculum updated, because all of the nurse specialists are people who have recently come out of practice to become an educator, or who are still practicing in a clinical capacity, either like per diem, in addition to being a full-time educator. So,
yeah. I mean, the educator means like, that sounds like so much fun. I love all those things. But of all the things you just listed, do you have like a favorite aspect of the nurse educator role that you love the most?
As I've gotten experience as a nurse educator, I think my favorite has shifted. It bounces around. I really liked being able to lecture, right? Because I started off my career as an adjunct faculty doing a lot of like clinical teaching, right? So that was what I did first. And I really do enjoy being in the hospital with students, because first and foremost, I'm a clinician. So I enjoyed that. I've come to really like lab and didactic teaching, because I'm just like, this is the root of everything, right? We can have more in-depth conversations. I can be super creative. So I've come to like that almost a little bit more. And I think I have moments where I'm like, oh, now I'm ready. I like being in clinical a lot more too. So I kind of wax and wane, but right now I'm in my didactic lab phase where I'm like really appreciate that part of my job. So
awesome. Do you have any like exemplars that showcase how impactful the role of a nurse educator is? Any great stories that you've experienced as an educator or as a learner?
Yeah, I think that I had a great mentor. And she was like, we didn't have a former educator in my first CVIC job. So she was both the educator and mentor and shift supervisor. And one of the greatest things I appreciated about her was she had her ADN, and she had told me, and she was kind of the first person to be like, hey, you might would do good at educating too. So she was kind of like another source of what veered me towards considering education, because she was like, she had a way about going about things in a very practical way. And I love the idea of like, it was no nonsense. And, a lot of critical care nursing environments can be very aggressive, right? And you feel very intimidated, but she made an intimidation-free environment. She held you accountable to like, you got to come with questions that make sense and come with like research and stuff like that. But I think one of the greatest things that she taught me was like the foundations of doing a good assessment. Like I learned that in school really well. I had an instructor who was finishing nurse practitioner school. So she did a really good job with teaching us physical assessment. I was like, wow, I want to do that for somebody. I want to give somebody that gift of being able to be that person who catches something or who puts the dots together because they dug deeper. They just weren't satisfied doing a quick like tap on the chest with the stethoscope and moving on, I
want to ask you too, before we had this interview, we chatted about nursing education as an act of justice. Can you explain to my audience what that means to you and how you see this like carried out in your role as a nurse educator?
Yeah. And I very much still vibe with that sentiment that nursing and nursing education can be or should be an act of justice. Many times they aren't, but I think that as nurses, we hold positions that give us the power, and maybe not the global power, but at least the individualized power to make a change, a difference in someone's life and try to correct wrongs, at least at that moment in time. Right. And then when I translate that to nursing education, I'm looking like we need so much change in nursing. We need to make nursing a more inclusive place. We need to make a career in nursing more accessible to more people from marginalized or historically excluded populations. Right. And we don't have that in a universal sense now. And so when I look at nursing education being an act of justice, we know that part of the way forward for achieving health equity and things like that means that we need to have a nursing population that reflects the population of our various communities or as the United States as a whole. And that's part of the answer. And so I think that nursing education plays a big role in health equity because we can provide, and again, not only talking about, we definitely have it from a racial perspective we need to improve, but not just from a different lenses, right? Whether it's from someone and their view of their gender or their views on religion or absence of religion, they come from a geographic area, rural areas, people who are second career nurses. We need all these people because they help change and improve nursing and make it better and make it a more inclusive so that we're able to more impactfully reach out and reach people and communities that nursing normally might have alienated in the past to some degree. So I think nursing as an act of justice, nursing education, particularly as an act of justice, means that I need to make nursing education something that's accessible and something that is producing people that are actually able to give back to their communities, right? Whether it's as a clinician, whether it's as a future researcher, whether it's as a future advanced practice nurse, nursing education has to be the right. We can't train people to go out and have understanding and be empathetic and care, right, about others. And we don't have that same praxis towards our own practitioners and students. And I think sometimes nursing has that dichotomy of like, oh, yes, we want you to be super understanding, but then I'm going to punish you for, being 5 minutes late because I have to drop my kid off at school and I'm a single parent, right? And not being flexible and understanding. So we can't have that only be an outward thing towards people outside of nursing. It has to start on the inside us too. We need to start changing things. Why nursing education is very ableist, right? We have people like the seated nurse, Andrea.
Love her.
Right. We love her. And it's like, but how do we make it easier for people just because you're in a wheelchair? Why does that mean you can't be a nurse? And you'll have people arguing online about, well, you have to be able to lift things. I'm like, no, we have options. Like there's options. And I think sometimes we accept biases way too easily or assumptions way too easily. We accept that ableism way too easily sometimes in nursing, but like different things like that. And not even just people with physical disabilities, but, invisible disabilities as well. Like, how do we make nursing more acceptable so that we can help people who are neurodivergent thrive, right? In that spectrum of things. How do we make it more so that people who they need to change their life circumstances and they can't afford to go to a 4-year university to go get a bachelor's degree? Why are we trying to blitz associate degree programs and LPN programs when, one, those are the people that are primarily caring for our older adults in the long-term care setting, and they're doing a lot of the work in the community care setting, right? And then two, we don't have education in the United States is not equally accessible to everybody for various reasons. And we need nurses. And historically, 60% of nurses have come from associate degree. 60% of RNs have come from, associate degree programs up until the last, 6 or 7 years. So I just think that my way in approaching nursing education as a whole means that we have to make nursing something that's accessible and make it meaningful for the community. I'm not trying to look like any other profession. I'm not trying to be on parity with physicians or anybody else. Nursing has always, and my friend Unicorn on Twitter always says that nursing has always changed to meet the needs of society at various times. So we went from taking care of the elderly and the sick and young children to it being a academic discipline now, and to having a scientific basis for our work, to creating advanced practice roles. Nursing has always gone through a metamorphosis to meet whatever needs there are. And I really think that that's important. That's a foundational aspect of nursing. We don't just do one thing. We are jacks of all trades. That in itself lends ourselves to creating justice and being a supporting pillar for justice, even when there isn't any.
Yeah. Amen. So one thing I wanted to point out that as nurses, we are super creative and ingenuitive, and we come up with like solutions to lots of problems. Like there are so many
Right.
quote nurse rigged things that we can come up with, ways to creatively get our patients up into the chair and creatively get our patients outside. Like we find ways around disabilities and to come alongside them and to still like equip our patient. Why are we not doing that for our coworkers, our profession as a whole? Like,
Or why aren't we encouraging our students to be like, to view nursing as a creative? I think we've gotten to this idea that nursing is a science, so it has to be this one thing. And I'm like, no. It's one of my things where everybody's like, just because you do good in math and science, that means you should probably consider healthcare as a career. And I'm like, no, but we need people who majored in like English and social studies and arts, right? We need people who can look at life creatively. Nursing should be viewed as this one thing. There should be room for creativity in nursing. And so often our creativity, I feel like, gets starched in people's desire, like, no, we all have to do this and look this way.
Yeah, like the tasking, just the
Right.
simple task of nursing. Let's look beyond the task. Oh my gosh,
Right.
there's so much opportunity to make an impact on the profession and healthcare as a whole if we would use our brains and our hearts a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah, I love this idea of nursing and nursing education as an act of justice. Thanks for sharing that. So, how do you hope to change nursing education for the better?
Well, one, I want, by existing, right? I'm a double minority in nursing. I am a man and I am a Black man. And then when I go into we look at the roles of nurse educators, I'm even more of a unicorn, because a lot of men in general don't tend to go into nursing education. There are definitely some there. I'm not saying there aren't, but they tend to skew towards, advanced practice or leadership roles. And I feel like I want people to think about a nurse educator and they think that they could picture someone like me, or even if it's someone different than me, as a nurse educator, or as a nurse in general. I also want to make nursing education something that does a better job of balancing. Like, we do need theory. Like, everybody says we don't need theory. We need less theory, more clinical. And I'm like, we actually need both, and yes, we could do a better job of balancing and being more creative about how we teach theory, because theory is boring in school. Let's just go ahead and get out of the way. For most people, it's boring, but I'm like, that's because, we don't teach it in a way, we haven't made it meaningful and we haven't taught it in a way that makes it stand out. So I'm like, we actually need both. I would love to be a part of helping create that balance of making a better balance, so that we have to prepare nurses that know how to do things, right? That know how to have physical skills, but also that know how to reason around like the nuance around performing the skill, that we're not just, doing the skill blindly, And so I really want to change it in that way. I want nursing education to not, when people think about nursing school, that at some point they don't think about like, oh, it's just this horrible experience, because a lot of us have that thought, right? And I had overall positive experience in nursing school, but there are some things that were kind of like traumatic that happened, or that you kind of lived with this constant anxiety and fear. And I want people to understand the seriousness of nursing. And I think that we can achieve people having the seriousness of nursing and being accountable for what they need to do without creating this dynamic of like the shoe is about to drop on you. It should be the way that we're going to invite the people we need to be in nursing is that we're going to have to make it more accessible, and we're going to have to make it more approach nurse education from a more humanistic standpoint, right?
Amen. So is there anything that you would want someone who is considering going back to school to become a nurse educator to know? Like any wisdom or advice that you would want to share with them?
I think that, again, I'm a big proponent. I don't think you have to necessarily have a master's degree that had a sub-focus in nursing education, but there are a lot of options, right? So if I want to be a nurse practitioner, cool. If I want to be a CRNA, cool. But there are postmaster certificate programs in education, right? There are webinars, there are programs and fellowships that you can sign up for. You're doing yourself a favor if you not only just go teach and basing it off of your expertise as a clinician, but you also learn the art of teaching, how specifically to teach adults, how to teach in a hybrid fashion, how the theories behind that, right? Adult learning theory, making self-directed learning is important, making the education very practical and making the meaning clear about how this translates to what you're going to do every day. All of those came from me going through training programs and through coursework that taught me about the importance of these when you're educating nurses, right? And so I think it's about this idea of letting go of this idea of just being one thing. I'm just going to be an educator. I've always said we don't really have room for nurses who are just one thing anymore. You have to be an educator, a scientist, a leader, a clinician. Like, you really need to bring all those things together in your education. And you can't just be, I'm an expert clinician, so I'm going to be an educator. Either find a mentor, find somebody, Google about what are some creative ways to teach. You have to invest in the art of being an educator as much as you invest in the art of nursing. the art and science of nursing. There's an art and science to being a good educator and to teaching people, just as much as there's art and science to learning how to care for people in a nursing. And so you have to invest in both. Whatever way you do that, yes, a postmaster's program. I think I really enjoyed my master's in nursing education because that's what I knew my focus wanted to be. But you can do postmaster's certificate programs. A lot of times your jobs will pay for them or give you credit for them. Or you could, like I said, just do some continued education learning and get a good mentor that can help you learn some of these things. I think it's worth investing in learning that art and science of teaching.
That's good advice. All right, Patrick, I know you're very passionate about free open access nursing education. Can you tell my listeners where they could find you if they wanted to find some more nursing education goodness from Patrick?
Of course. Yeah, I am. So I am on most social platforms. I'm on Twitter as @NursePatMacRN. So that's @NursePatMacRN. I am on Instagram as PatMacRN. So just the PATMACRN. And I am on LinkedIn as well. You can find my website at www.patmacrn.com.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, I will link all those things in the show notes for my listeners. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your heart and your expertise. I know it's going to help so many nurses that are like on the fence. Should I go back and be a nurse educator? Just to kind of hear your perspective. Yes, you should. Yes, you should. We need more of them, right?
Right.
If the profession's going to ever recover, we're going to have more nurses at the bedside, which means more nurse educators to train those nurses. So yeah, super, super important part of fixing the nursing shortage. But yeah, thank you again, Patrick, so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Before you go, I have an exciting announcement. You can now earn CEs for listening to this podcast. That's right. RNegade has teamed up with podcast hosts like me who are delivering amazing content that not only educates, but inspires you to be the best for your patients. You get to learn and earn continuing education credits while absorbing knowledge from thought leaders and innovators in the field of health and medicine. You're already listening to podcasts during your commute, at the gym, or while unwinding after a long day. So why not earn your CEs at the same time? And that's where pod classes come in. Yep, it's just what it sounds like. It's CE learning through podcast. To learn more, I put a link in the show notes for you. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you learned something that will save a life. Remember, nursing is a team sport, so trust your intuition and don't give up advocating until you are confident you've done what's right by your patient. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of Sarah Lorenzini's. That's me and mine alone. They are not intended as medical advice and should not take the place of your institution's policies or procedures. Evidence-based practice is ever-changing, and your patient care should reflect the current best practice. So if you want to get in contact with me, you can shoot me an email at sarah@rapidresponsern.com or on all social media platforms as the Rapid Response RN.